All members are present, and I will entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. And we have on our agenda some appearances before our committee and a bunch of folks in the room tonight. Thanks for coming, everybody. And item one is an appearance by Tom Carmen, Schenk, and Celeste Cleet. Thank you, Cleet Anderson and Willis Towers Watson. And Peggy, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. If we could start with the audit first, the GASB 75 or the OPEB report, the
Mr.
Personal Plan
Mr. Chair?
Benefit Report.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I noticed when we were recording last week, it's difficult to hear people if they're not at the table with us. No, that's okay. Can we have the folks come up to you? Is that be okay, Mr. Chair?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Yeah, go ahead, Peggy, and yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, sure, come on.
Yeah, and can you gentlemen introduce yourselves to us, please?
Okay, I'm Tom Carmen, one of the shareholders with Schenk CPAs. Been working on the audit for a number of years. I've also brought along Brian Grunwald. Brian is also a shareholder at Schenk. And Brian will be actually taking over for me on the job because I'm going to be retiring in January.
Congratulations to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
My name's Cleet Anderson. I'm from Willis Towers Watson. We calculated the GASB 74, 75 numbers. So we'll be talking about that today.
All right, well, thanks. Go ahead with your presentation, or however you gentlemen and gentlelady wish to do it. Go ahead.
So if we can start with the audit first, I think that maybe is the all-encompassing document. The OPEB information is part of that. So we'll start with Schenk, and then we'll go on to Cleat, and then maybe do a wrap-up and any questions that the committee has.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll do this kind of similar to how we have in prior years. I'll make a few comments on things, and if anyone has any questions, just feel free to go ahead and ask. There were two documents issued as a result of our audit. The first is the large bound comprehensive annual financial report, and the other is our management communication document. As far as the comprehensive annual financial report, it does include all the city's financial statements and our independent auditor's report on those statements. And once again, we are issuing an unmodified opinion on the city's financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2016. Essentially means that all the information that's required to be included in this financial document has been included. There are no exceptions or omissions of information, and everything that's in here fairly states the financial condition of the city for that year end. Essentially the same report that you've always received. It also does include, since the city receives federal and state funding, we are also required to test the city's compliance with various regulations and stipulations for some of the various grants that you are receiving. And we are issuing a report that is also included in this document that says that there are no compliance items that we're required to report to management or the grantor agencies, and there are no internal control items that we are required to report. So that's also the same report that you've always received, and it's the best report we can issue on internal control and compliance for those grants.
Great.
So unless there's any questions on that, I'd just like to make a few comments on information in the management communication. The bound document, this does include a lot of summary financial information of the city operations. And I'd like to start on page 5. The first part is just a standard communication from us as auditors to you as management of the city, and there really are no issues that we were required to report in that communication. I think in looking at this, compare some of the various balances that you have for some of your operations, comparing the year end 2016 back to the 2015 balances. And probably the biggest area to look at is, taking up the first half of the page is the city's general fund. That's your general operating fund, your general budget. And what this shows is comparing the year-ended balance at the end of 2015 was about 44.5 million. You're down to about 42.2 in the 2016 year. Some of that relates to just the transfer of funds from the general fund to a capital fund. That's where if you see about the 6th line down, 2015 had about $2.1 million in capital accumulation, and then number 0 for this year. Other than that, the numbers you really wanna look at are down under that unassigned section, which is essentially funds that you're carrying forward that have no specific outside restrictions or really internal restrictions on those funds. They haven't been set aside for any purposes. And you have two you set aside. You do have a contingency fund, but there really isn't anything specific that that's set aside for. And you just have your other unassigned funds. That totaled about 3.6 million at the end of 2015. 2016, it's up to about 8 million. So the balance that you're carrying forward that really has no strings or anything attached to it did increase for the year. And the balances that you have, a lot of the monies that are set aside as assigned balances, that kind of big section in the middle there. Those are essentially monies that you as the governing body have set aside for specific purposes. At any point in time, you could either add to those or you could remove those. So in effect, those are also funds that you potentially have available for spending that you'd want to do. So overall, based upon your budget for a community your size, you have some pretty strong balances that you're maintaining going forward. You're in a pretty solid position from your general fund standpoint. The remainder of that page, your special revenue funds, a lot of these are, most of these are grants or funds that are collected for specific purposes. Balances can fluctuate just based upon what happens with those. If you received a grant and spend all of it at the end of the year, or there's money that's carrying forward for project initiatives, those types of things, that can fluctuate. And over on the next page, capital projects funds. Those are funds that you're maintaining for major capital improvements. The majority of the funds that you have there relate to your TIF districts. And what you see is there are funds that actually do have deficit balances, which isn't unusual for TIF districts, because essentially, you'll pay for a lot of your project costs up front, and then over the life of the district, you're getting tax increments back in where you recover the cost of those improvements that you made. The most important thing with this is to just monitor those over time and see if it looks like you may have any districts where, over their life, there may be some issues that you have where you may not be able to recover all of your costs that have put in. I don't believe at this point in time you have any seriously distressed districts that are going to need immediate assistance. I will say there are communities out there that aren't in as good a shape with some of these, where just due to economic factors and other things that have happened, it's probably going to take some other outside funding, either additional tax levies or things like that, to help these districts pay for these costs. So, once again, I think most of what you have is just pretty much timing issues there. The remainder of the financial summaries that we have are for your major utilities, and overall, unless there's some specific questions on those, I think we talk about this every year, you generally do a very good job of maintaining adequate rates for your utilities so that you are covering your operating costs and your debt service costs that are required to be paid through those operations. So pretty much for all of them, your operating results are fairly stable comparing one year to the next. Any questions on anything?
Mr. Chair,
Sure, Alderman Weigel.
on the capital projects fund, especially on the TID balances, shouldn't those be going, if the negative balances, shouldn't those be going down from year to year then? If we're paying, because the expenses are up front?
Well, it can depend, because some of these, your major expenditures may be up front, but as time goes by, there may be other projects that you do during the life of those districts. So depending if you had any of those, that could contribute to a larger deficit.
Go ahead, Peggy.
So maybe just a little more specifically, some of the ones that you see going up are for debt service payments, so there might not yet be tax value or increment value there, but we still have to pay our debt payment, so then it goes negative.
Yeah.
I think I saw that you just got the TID report.
Yep.
So on the back of the TID report, I created a status report for each one, so it'll show these balances, and it'll show what the plan is over the life. So
Okay.
that's what Tom was referring to when he said, we have a plan. It's really kinda nice that we don't have any that we don't have a plan on how to fund. I think the biggest deficit that we didn't have a plan for was about 300,000. And when you're talking about TIFs in the area that we're talking about, it's a pretty good position to be in as far as TIFs go. But yeah, in the back of it's in the very back of the report, like page 64-ish. And there'll be one page, yep, there's one right there. So there'll be one page for each TID, and it will show what the revenues and expenditures are expected to be. It's a pretty conservative report because it has, it doesn't assume increases in tax rate, it doesn't assume increases in value other than the, the planned increases, so no inflation or anything like that. So it's pretty conservative, but usually that's pretty helpful.
I wanna thank you for putting the name of the TID
It's 'cause I don't
on
know
the
that.
charts. That looks awesome. Cause I see this 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. They don't always jump out at me as far as which one is which, so, thank you.
Any other questions or concerns from the committee? All right. Yeah, thank you. Sounds like a great report. Sounds like things are going
One
all
more
right.
question.
Yes, Alderman Lodge.
So if you had to give us a letter grade, A?
Double A through.
I mean, no, like what you get in school. Is this what you see, like an average of most communities are performed to this level on the audit, or are we above average, or I guess that's not something.
Communities are all over the board. I would say for the community that you are, which is essentially an older landlocked community, where if you're going to do development, you're taking something and you're tearing it down and you're rebuilding it into something. We work at a lot of places where we've got a nice piece of old farmland
Yeah,
right off
farm
the
field.
interstate, and all we have to do is put some things in there and it just explodes. For having the circumstances that you're under, the balances that you have, I would say they're very positive compared to similar types of communities, because you don't have easy access to annex in and expand your tax base. You have to create that. That's why you have to do those types of projects and spend that money to make those things happen. But I think you've done a very good job with those. I mentioned the compliance report for the federal and state grants. You have departments in the city that do a very good job of going out and getting grants and properly managing them so that you continue to get those grants. The people that you have in your finance department, and I don't get anything more for saying nice things about the people in finance, I don't have to do that.
Hey, you're
But-
retiring.
Yeah, but you do have, a very good staff that we come in and, the things that we're asking for are provided for us. We don't have issues, correcting entries that we have to make, those types of things. So you're in a real positive situation compared to a lot of other communities that are out there. And it starts with the people that you have internally and works up from there, because
That's
there's,
a B plus.
yeah, right, yeah,
What
you'd be
is
right in that range.
Okay.
That's what I would,
Okay.
we don't give out grades like Moody's
No,
or
I know,
somebody
I
does,
know.
but that's,
No,
but
just-
that's, I, it's a.
Well, I wasn't
very-
thinking like R or X or PG.
No, you're in a very good situation here. Like I say, for the community that you had, because there are struggles that you have that are just inherent within your community. And you're doing a very good job, dealing with those.
Okay. Anything else? And then for the OPEB portion, is it the next part to discuss? I think that's your part, Cleet.
Yes. Well, I'm not gonna go through the report unless you want to. I don't think there's really need for that. I'm just gonna touch on some high-level numbers here. Essentially, was things we do here actually get incorporated in your financial statement. The whole purpose of these valuations is that for GAAP accounting is that if you offer post-retirement benefits, you need to disclose the value of that promise, if you will, or obligation in your financial statement. And so that's our job as the actuaries, is to provide the numbers to the accountants so that can be put into your financial statement. GASB 74 and 75, the GASB doesn't tell you what benefits you have to offer or how you pay for them. It just simply says if you offer them, you have to disclose that in your financial statement. So the operative phrase here is about disclosure. Now, it's pretty complicated stuff, and you might conclude that you're disclosing something that nobody understands, but at least you're giving it a try. There's probably like three big numbers that I like to touch on here that we do this, and this is basically the first one is the liability, and it used to be called the AAL. Now the accounting statements have changed, so it wasn't bad enough that we had all these the disclosure requirements. They've actually increased them with the new 74 and 75. Used to have 43 and 45. But essentially in some of the terminologies changed and things like that, but I won't go into that. The first thing is your OPEB liability. That's the present value of benefits earned to date by participants in your plan. And really, this liability, before I say the number, is it's the present value is basically that's what your mortgage is. So if you paid it off today, how much is the value that you're paying it off? Now over time, you'll pay much more than that, but today the value of that benefit is so much. And your OPEB liability as of 1/1/2016 would be $140,943,000. Okay, so that is the present value of benefits earned to date by your plan participants. Now this is a little different from your mortgage in that your mortgage, generally speaking, as you pay it off, it goes down. This liability will keep going up. And the main reason is that if you look at the way the accounting works, is that the premise is that employees earn this benefit over their working lifetime, so that by the time you're eligible to retire, you should fully expensed this plan. Expense meaning you recognize that you made this promise, you have to pay for it. And so as you go through time, you're actually earning, employees are earning another piece of that benefit, and that keeps adding to your mortgage. So this mortgage is looks a little worse than yours, where you're paying it down. Imagine like you kept borrowing more money in a sense, okay? And you really aren't. What you're really doing is that you promise them this much, and from an accounting standpoint, you're sort of earning their way to here. So that's why it keeps going up. So the liability is let's call it $141 million. Now you have what's the terminology for your plan is a pay-as-you-go plan. And what that means is that you don't have any plan assets. You have them pre-funded. So your cash expense is about $5 million, and that's what you pay, but you don't set any money aside. Most pension plans, by comparison, are funded to some degree or another, but there is no mandate for funding here. And it's quite common to not have, for these plans to either be, as like yours, just pay as you go, just pay the cash cost, or have assets that are much less than the total liability. So if you were to say, are you unusual in the fact that your plan really isn't funded, the answer is no, actually. That's pretty common. It's unusual to have plans that are funded to a great degree. And part of that comes from the fact that it wasn't mandated in the first place. And when this accounting came along, it kind of got everybody's attention. People started thinking about pre-funding. In other words, not just pay the cash cost, but set some assets aside as well. And that they're doing that more. But I think generally speaking, most cities and counties and school districts have been paying more in, but most have also have been reducing the liability. You can either raise the bridge, lower the river here to get to deal with this liability, and I think they're doing both, which is either cutting back on the benefit on the plan and or contributing more to the plan than the cash cost. Today, you've just been contributing the cash cost. Lastly, you have an accounting expense, which is about $8.7 million. And that really is a sort of a recognition, a way of disclosing a piece of that liability, so you keep getting into your financial statement by expensing a piece of it every year. So we have this liability, here's another piece of it, and here it goes. And so that's how you end up disclosing liability in the long run, is you keep saying, here's another piece of what we owe. You're not paying it off. So then your accrual expense is not the same as your cash. So there's two different things. And if you're not familiar with accrual accounting, then maybe this is, that's okay too, because a lot of people don't get that. But essentially, this is our way. We have a lot of assumptions that go into this. In other words, it is a projection. It's a weather forecast. It's not the weather, as I like to say. Because what we're really trying to say is, I don't want to use Irma as an example, but essentially we're trying to do that is that we have all these actuarial assumptions that we use to try to predict how much, how big is the promise that you have made. Things like, turnover and inflation and retirement rates and discount rates and so on and so forth. And we put that all together, and essentially then you project it out and you discount it back, so to speak. And that's really what your mortgage is again too. So so we provide these numbers to your financial folks so they can put that into your financial statement.
So how are we doing?
Well, I know you've been making plan changes, and we reflect that in the back. There's like, half this report is about various changes you made along the way. What we do is we value what's called the substantive plan, which basically says is whatever your plan is today, whatever you have promised to people, we're gonna assume that stays unchanged until you announce something different. So this is what it is, and so we project it through time. And so you have been adopting changes. And you can see those that are I'm not gonna walk through them, but in the back, there are ways of reining this in, so to speak. And there's, if you wanna call it that, and I think there's probably three major ways you can do that, either through eligibility, through the benefits, or through contributions. Who's eligible? How long are they eligible? What is the benefit design? What does it cover? And lastly, what do retirees pay for it, and what do you pay for it? And pretty much all the levers come from those three options. If you're going to change the plan, you're really dealing with those things. So, for example, you said, well, we can't, anybody who's hired after a certain date isn't eligible anymore. That's an eligibility lever. Raising the contributions is an obvious one. The one that has the least impact is the benefit design itself, like deductibles and co-insurance and all.
So are our OPEB liabilities properly funded at this point, or is that something that's even outside the scope of this report?
Well, right now, it's I guess you'd call it unfunded, which is whatever your cash cost is, you're paying it, okay? So if you have $5 million in retiree cash costs for a year, you pay the $5 million. So you really haven't set any money aside as an asset to help pay for it in the future. And again, so that's the thing, is that you could put more money aside. Now, from an accounting standpoint, I should be talking this way since we have two of them sitting right next to me, so plug your ears.
It's okay.
He's retiring.
Yeah, you could let them have it here with that, earlier about that grade, so.
One thing I just wanna throw out, because this might help for the people on the committee. In the bound financial report, if you wanna turn to page 71, this is kind of a little bit of a summary of what Cleet's talking about. This liability
The
block
assumptions,
that's
yeah.
kind of down, 3/4 of the way down the page, where you start with a balance at the beginning of the year of 164 million. Then you've got estimated costs, you've got changes in assumptions, which is what was mentioned. The benefit payments, that's your contributions. That gets you down to the $140 million balance.
So our
So
balance
that's-
moved down in 1 year.
Yes,
due to
Based
those
primarily
factors.
on changes in plans we offer.
Actually, it was
that.
actually the cost was a huge
Oh, the
one.
cost, yeah.
So,
Okay.
when the narrow network was implemented, that big change in rates, that's the
That's where
vast
that,
majority
that's where that
of
30
this.
million, 31 million came from.
So the service cost, well, and there's gonna be a quiz after we get done here, so make sure you're
I'm
paying
taking
attention.
notes.
Can I borrow this for a second?
Open
Well, go right ahead.
Okay, open book. So essentially you're saying is $164 million, so what adds to it? Service costs. What is service costs? That's the piece of benefit that employees earned during this current year. So I said, they're earning it over their working lifetime. Employees earned about $4.8 million worth of benefits in the last year. Then you have an interest cost, and this is getting a little bit more wonky, but essentially is that this is a present value calculation, which means as you move forward in time and you get closer to having to pay it, you lose a year of being able to discount that liability, which makes it go up. In other words, you lose one, so that's the interest expense. The change in assumption, that really came from changing to 74, 75. There was a different actuarial methods, and I don't want to get into it here unless you really want to, but essentially what it said is there's different ways of getting to this ultimate result, and the old way had you kind of accelerated, and when we moved to the new one, it kind of backed off. So in a sense, it was almost like saying you had expense sort of ahead of the new methodology, so you get a credit for that. So it didn't, to a certain extent, it didn't say your plan is, from that perspective, less expensive. That's just saying is that you kind of got, ahead of the new accounting approach, and so you're gonna get a break, and, it's gonna slow down as far as the expensing going forward. And then the last thing, the benefit payments. So these are all, a plus means you're adding to the liability. The change in assumption meant your liability went down, so we knocked off 31 million. Just like with your mortgage, when you pay, in this case, $5 million, that pays off a piece of your mortgage. So you add those all together, and what do you got? You're down to about $141 million based on 164 at the beginning of the year.
And that's a positive. We
Yes.
want that to go down.
You want that to go down, just like if you think of 141 million is your mortgage, and it's gonna keep going up too, in other words. So it isn't like if you come back next year and say, why is this higher? And the answer is because it's supposed to be, they're earning more benefit, that kind of thing.
Okay. Alderman May.
So you said we've got cash of about 5 million, our liabilities about 141 million, so we're about 4% of the way there. What is a good number to be at?
I mean, as far as being,
Assets, you're saying we have about 5 million in
Well,
assets, right?
5 million is what you pay annually. There is no amount that's set aside for
yeah,
that.
you spend it all.
Okay,
So that was basically just to deal with the cash expense, you
Mhm.
spend it. So,
that's
It-
cash expense, the way you mentioned it, I thought it was,
yeah, I'm sorry. So if you had assets and you had to put them in a trust, so in other words, you can't just say, oh, we're gonna have a checking account over here and it's got $5 million in it, we get 5 million of credit. It has to be in a proper trust. So that's, it's like the golden handcuffs, if you will. The good news is it can't be used for anything else but this. The bad news is it can't be used for anything else. But if you do, it does start to help us because now you have a net liability. So if you have $140 million in liability and you have $10 million in assets, well, now your net liability is $130 million. And it also offsets the expense. So the liability comes down and the expense comes down once you start having assets to offset this. Now, I really can't answer your question other than certainly having assets is better than not having them. But beyond that, I can't really say anything that's more that, it's certainly a good thing because part of what this has done is made people realize is that, if you don't deal with it, the cash expense keeps growing and, your revenue base isn't. And so that's the reason why maybe today, if you try to start putting money aside, it wouldn't be a bad idea. If you can do that, I know that's easier said than done. But at the same time, then you also, if you have to, lowering the liability, raise the bridge or lower the river. Eligibility, benefits, contributions.
Mr. Chair. Peggy's up next.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Just a couple things. So we don't have the official trust. However, if you look in our fund balance and our reservations, we do have 8.8 million, 8.85 million that we have reserved. So we budget our expenses every year. We're balanced budget on that. So we're budgeting our expenses, but there's also this reserve in place in case if we would need something. It's not the official trust that he's talking about. It can't lower our obligation, but the monies are council designated. So I think that's something important as well.
Alderman Weigel.
So, again, I like to know what our neighbors are doing, other communities like us do. Would other communities like us have that dedicated trust that they would try to contribute to every year on top of? Is that something you see a lot of?
It's growing, but it is,
It's difficult to do, I understand that. No one's got
Yeah, where's the money?
fat budgets.
Yeah, exactly, and there's a lot of, especially I think some of the bigger group of cities also are unfunded too. So again, it's one of these things where I think that most of them were not for a long time until this whole exercise came along in the first place and started to get people's attention to say, whoa, we've got more more here than we thought. But that's the struggle. Is okay. Yeah, it's really great to say we should set the money aside, and then you got to find it. So. And like we're saying here is you've got $8 million, but that's not locked into this, so it doesn't show up in this accounting, but you have the money too. So, yeah, and it's all over the place as far as plan design and contributions and everything.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, what we see in practice, when you're looking at similar communities, there are a few other cities that offer the same level of benefits that you do. Most do not. And I think a lot of it comes down to overall the nature of your community. When you had a community that had significant employers that offered benefits to employees back at a time when those benefits were relatively inexpensive and easy to offer. That was done. What's happened in private businesses, a lot of those benefits have gone away. You still continue to carry those here, and based upon the current accounting standards, the actuarial calculations that are done, this is the end result. This isn't, it's required to be included in your financial report, and it's something that you should look at and understand what the implications are. But really what it comes down to when you're analyzing the situation that you're in, you want to look at, you know, currently you're making a $5 million approximately contribution to retiree health insurance. It's essentially what it is. If you can fit that in your budget, and that's a benefit you want to continue to offer to employees of the city, then you can do that. When you look at setting up trusts and funding those things, the thing to keep in mind with that is, because this situation occurs more in school districts now than it does in municipalities. There were a number of school districts that went ahead and funded a lot of these liabilities. And what happened over time was they changed their plans and their liabilities went down. And now they've got money sitting in a legal trust that they can't do anything with. Or you can have, I think, West Milwaukee, West Allis was one of the school districts that got involved in the arbitrage issue, where they funded the entire thing and then that blew up.
That was my reference to golden handcuffs, is
Yeah.
once you put the money in there.
So that, you know, so you have, I think like I said, the biggest thing is to understand what's happening with this. And it's an actuarial calculation, and I think, you know, as Cleet said, the current calculation is different than the one that was there years ago. So you had a $30 million change, just because of how you calculate it. Your circumstances are essentially the same for a lot of it. So you have to be careful as to what you really decide to do. Most communities are looking at really what benefits are we providing and what is that costing us. And if it gets to a point where you can't handle it in your budget, or if it gets to the point where you say, we want to evaluate our total benefit package as to what we're providing, that's what you want to be making your decisions on, at least from what we see in a lot of places. Because, yeah, you've got some big numbers here. And they'll probably keep going up, because if you look at, other than this $30 million change, you've got about $12 million of increases with your $5 million of payments. So if that stays the same, your liability is gonna go up by at least that much next year, because your interest is probably gonna go up.
You remind me of something too, is one of the things about changing retiree benefits, and I'm not advocating, just describing here, is that generally speaking, a lot of what people spend time on is what I would call a soft landing. And it really has to do is, right, quite frequently you have retirees who are, for the most part, left alone because they're retired. You have young people who pretty much are on the outside looking in. You decide, you know, we're not going to offer anymore, and now you get this middle group that you're going to perhaps see a little closer retirement, like somebody like me, and him, and essentially who are, you know, how are you going to deal with this? And it becomes difficult because you have to look at this. You can't say, well, unlike an active plan where you can make a change that occurs like next year, many of these changes for retirees take a number of years to get rolling, because you're saying, well, okay, we want to give a window and then things like this, or we're not going to affect retirees, so it'll have an accounting impact but no cash, because of, you know, things like that. So certainly there's a much slower sort of evolution of or implementation of savings on a retiree plan than an active.
Anyone else? Any other questions or concerns? Oh, Alderman May.
So what is a bad liability? I mean, we've got the number on paper, and I imagine that plays into some of our other economic issues.
When you
What's
get
a
to
bad
the
number?
point where it is difficult in your budget to meet your current obligation, that's when
Cash.
something will have to be done.
Yeah.
Because that means you're either going to continue to fund this this current liability as it comes due, or you're going to have to face some cuts in programs that you're doing. There are places that as long as they can fit it in their budget and it's not affecting anything, doesn't really matter what that liability is. You just wanna make sure that you're monitoring where it's going and what's causing that. If you're getting more and more people that are accumulating onto your plan, you know, that means that somewhere down the road, even though you're not funding it currently, you're going to have to pay for that. So it's just how you monitor what's happening. And I think that the biggest thing that I think both of us were trying to get across here is so that you at least have some understanding of how this thing is working and what it's gonna be doing for you.
I think, just to finish here then, is that, from a cash standpoint, is that the thing to watch is, if your revenue is like this and your retiree expenses doing that, you can see the problem right there. This is what could be happening. So, either you have to start setting money aside to help pay for that in the future, or you have to lower the promise, the obligation, so that it doesn't keep growing like it will.
Okay, anyone else? All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy retirement.
Yeah, thanks. And see 2 of you 3 next year. Yeah, you're right.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right, and then moving on to item E, new and previous matters, communication from city administrator, transmitting report on assessment of the city's current information technology operations.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
so I'm Tony Warkacheski. I've been with the city now since early June, so I think I'm starting my 4th month. I was brought in to West Allis to do an assessment of your IT operation. Took on the assignment, not really sure what my recommendations were going to be because I didn't really know what I was walking into, quite honestly. So I started with the most broad and open perspective I could. I brought to the table about 28 years of experiences of myself being in the IT profession. I did a lot of benchmarking against the city of West Allis's IT operation with some of your neighboring municipalities. But most importantly, I think key to my work was actually going out and talking to a lot of the customers that use IT within the city. So the biggest part of my study was just talking to the other leadership within the city to find out what's working and what's not working well from an IT perspective. So last Tuesday at the Common Council meeting, my report was published, put into the record, so to speak. I didn't want to spend a lot of time here today draining all 40 pages of it. I will tell you that I found a lot of good things happening within IT. Most of those were documented in that report. But I did find some things that I think if we make some investments and we put some focus around, your IT program can take what it needs to do to make the city even better. So what I have for you today is just to try to consolidate a 40-page assessment into a 2-page PowerPoint. And really what it is, the first page is a summary of really what the 5 broad recommendations are. And I'm not going to drain all those. I hope the words somewhat resonate with you. They are listed in what I would call priority order. So first and foremost, this idea around getting our arms around all of the demand that's hitting IT, all the projects that we're being asked to do, and then executing on those projects. That came through very clearly for me when I was interviewing the leaders. There's a lot of people putting a lot of work on IT's shoulders, and we need a better job of collecting what all those requests are, prioritizing it, and working on the most urgent requests for the city going forward. And then the list works down from there. What's on the back is really where I attempted to highlight the funding changes that we need to execute on some of these areas of focus. So in some of the list of the 5 big bets that we're making, not all of them need budget increases, but some of them could use a budget lift. And what I tried to highlight on that second page is what specifically budget increases will we need to accelerate the work in those 5 areas that we want to focus on and improve on. And then if we make those investments, what I tried to do on the far right was map those investments back to where I think we'd get the most lift on the 5-year strategic plan for the city. So again, the big report was published last week. This is a very high-level summary. I'm here really just to answer any questions you may have on the large report or this summary, and I'll open the table for that at this point.
Thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, starting out looking at 2 additional employees, but we had a discussion earlier, even looking for perhaps some more in the future. But
That was a
2 to
joke.
start out with. All right, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I didn't think the number was actually the number that you had said, but 2 to
Yeah.
start out with.
It's really 3.
3.
Um,
Okay.
There's 3 new FTEs. They're not new to the FTE pool for the city. I believe working with Rebecca and Peggy, it would be more of a switch of resources, a reallocation of resources from other parts of the city government to IT. But for me, it's an increase of 3. For IT, it's an increase of 3. It has to do with just the increase of demand that's being put on the shoulders of IT. Some of it has to do with the growing technology needs for some of our divisions or departments within the city. I'll call out public safety and public service as the highlight. Police and fire, most importantly. I have some of my customers in the back of the room. We have an individual named Jack Coffey that is really doing a wonderful job of supporting all the IT needs for our police department. But we don't have an equivalent to Jack to support fire and emergency safety, emergency services. And I know I'm talking with Chief Pooler. We've kind of missed the boat there from an IT perspective on meeting the needs of the fire department. So really what we would like to do there is add a FTE to support a public safety practice, and then have those 2 individuals kind of cross-train each other on each other's operations. So by that we get 2 resources supporting those critical functions, but then you also get some cross-training so that if anything happens to one of them, we've got another person who knows how those operations run. Another place where we asked for an FTE was to dedicate towards the Department of Public Works. So when I walked around DPW, I was amazed at the amount of paper that flows through that organization. You actually have a few divisions there that are pretty advanced with their use of IT. Water and forestry in particular do a pretty good job of keeping track of all their assets and have some somewhat sophisticated work order capabilities, although a lot of them are homegrown. But streets and fleet, a lot of big assets, a lot of work going through those organizations, and they're still very much paper-based systems that they use to run those divisions. So we look to make some investments there from a technology perspective to give them better tooling, but we would also ask for an FTE to be dedicated to DPW because there is such a need for them, I think, to lift how they use technology to advance what they do for the city. And then the third resource, which I'm drawing a blank, a dedicated project and portfolio manager. Again, there is so much demand hitting the IT department right now. I was amazed when I got here how much was being asked of IT, but how little we could get our arms around what all those requests were. And I'm not talking about fix a printer or give me another monitor. I'm talking about projects that can take a significant amount of work to do. So things like realizing the idea of a virtual city hall, where we put more things online so that people don't have to come to City Hall and call the police department to get work. Putting more cameras up so that we can secure the city. Putting more mobile devices in the hands of our workers so that when they go to do work in the city, they don't have to take a piece of paper with them and mark it up and then come back in the office and update systems. They can bring a mobile device and record what they're doing real time. Those are all projects that are being asked of IT to help fund. We got to get our arms around what all those things are. Once we do that, we have a better idea to prioritize what's most urgent. And then we need a person that helps us execute some of those projects. And so that would be where the third FTE would come in.
Okay. Alderman May.
I would say I'm not surprised.
Okay.
I kind of think that's kind of what I would have expected to see coming out of it. I'm wondering, when you were looking at the different departments and looking at
Yep.
technology, were you finding old pieces of software that maybe only the city uses and no one else, or this department and this department are using, similar things but they can't cross-communicate?
Yep.
Are you finding that?
Yeah, so what I saw a lot of, and I see a trend in a positive direction, but there has been a long history of when the city needed an IT solution, IT would roll up their sleeves, create a program specifically for the city, implement it, and the city would start using it. In other words, we'd build our own IT system. And what I've seen a trend in a positive direction is we're starting to move a little bit more away from that and either buying a package, because we're not the only municipality in the world, right, that needs to pay water bills or, you know, do anything online. We're starting to buy more applications, and in some cases even leverage like the cloud to kind of pay for a service to do more IT work. I think that's a trend in a positive direction. But yeah, Mr. Maida, to answer your question, there's pockets of City Hall that have very old applications that were developed a long time ago by people who no longer work here, and the people who know anything about them are starting to dwindle as well. And that's where I get into that risk of we've got a few key people here who are the only ones left who know how some of this stuff works. And that's a risk that we have to mitigate with some of these funding increases.
I appreciate your discussion about the cross-training. I think that's really important. That's good.
Any other questions or concerns?
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Weigel?
I just wanted to piggyback on what Alderman May said. I think we all read municipality or governing, and we see those ads. It seems, and it just seemed kind of obvious to me that we're not the only city our size that has snow plows and water meters and police departments.
Yep.
And for us to write our own software, so you'd be firmly in the camp of we're gonna buy or rent software.
You rent it first.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we can pay somebody a monthly service to get the value and not have IT pick up the burden of supporting it, have the vendor support it, that can look more expensive on paper versus having IT build something up front and then support it for free. But I'm definitely a proponent of renting first if that service is available. If not, buy the application and install it, but still use the vendor to support the application. And then try to avoid at all costs building something homegrown unless it's very specific that is used to differentiate West Allis from all the other municipalities. So an example of that might be the Mayor's Challenge, the program we just had to get the city more. We actually wrote on a technology called BP Logix, a solution for the community to register and become part of that program. It would have been hard to find a software package off the shelf for something called the Mayor's Challenge. So that one we kind of built ourselves at a very low price on a platform that's easy to support. So,
And then also cloud-based storage, wherever, I mean, that's all, there's still confidentiality on the cloud and all that we would need, wherever we would need it.
yeah, myself and Chief Mitchell have talked about the cloud. Worried that we're going to be putting our residents' information up in the cloud and that somebody's going to hack into it and get it.
It's gonna be held for ransom.
Yeah,
also.
I think those are valid to be concerned about, but some of the other companies that are already doing that have infinitely more confidential information than the city of West Allis, and some of the providers haven't had to meet those requirements. So I think definitely putting more things in the cloud storage should be part of our strategy going forward because the providers know how to secure it, in my opinion.
And with these new FTEs or moving FTEs around,
Yeah.
new employees essentially in the department, we'll see economies that should outweigh what on paper would look like additional costs, because we're streamlining the systems. And I'm not gonna ask you to delineate that, calculate that, because you'd have to hire somebody just to do that, you know? I understand that, but, and, I mean, clearly this is the way the world is going.
Yeah, I would like to think that an investment in IT has an exponential benefit trail down the path where we can automate some things that are paper-based. And a lot of folks' jobs around here are still tied to very clerical work. Now, I'm not gonna go after the clerical staff and ask for reductions in FTEs, but I do like to believe that if you invest in some automation in IT, that there's a back-end savings that you're making the rest of the organization more efficient. And if not, I'll give the FTEs back at some point, because then I'm not doing my job and making sure we get the biggest bang for that investment. I think that got on the record. I should have said that.
Sure, it is on the record. It's up in the cloud too.
So I'm just looking for your support. Again, it was a big assessment, a big document. I know it was a lot to read through. This is a summary, but going forward, I think these are good investments to make. I'll continue to work with Rebecca and Peggy to kind of go through the annual budgeting process to kind of move these things forward.
Any other questions? Or Rebecca, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the next steps for this would be including these reallocation of the positions in the 2018 recommended budget from the mayor. One of the things that we've been talking about though to get some of the projects kickstarted, such as our asset management and work order system in the
DPW.
Public Works Department, that perhaps we would, in the meantime, hire a temporary project manager to start before 2018, so we can get that started. We also have a few other things going on with human resources and things like that, that we need that assistance moving forward. So.
Alderman May?
I noticed you interviewed a lot of the department heads.
Mhm.
In the future, it might be nice to ask employees for their ideas as well. I know that wasn't part of the task, but it
Yeah.
might be interesting to see what ideas the people with their boots on the ground, I guess I would call it,
Yeah,
have to offer. So maybe a future step.
absolutely. It was daunting for me to think about interviewing 500
That's a lot.
people and to get this report done by the time the budget was going to call for the increases. But yes, absolutely, good point.
All right, anyone else? All right, so can I have the consensus of the committee that we want to proceed as Tony has suggested in his report? Am I correct with that? Yeah, very good. And then,
go.
all right, then can I have a motion to place this on file?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, thanks.
Thank
Tony.
you. Appreciate your time.
Item number 1 of matters for discussion and action, discussion regarding structure and operations of engineering and public works department.
Mr. Chair.
Rebecca.
So I had sent to you a letter I received from Mike Lewis announcing his his retirement effective January 2nd, 2018. So
It's gonna be a snowstorm that day, I think.
we read it in the Farmer's
Knock on
Almanac. So one of the things that various people have discussed was perhaps taking the public works and the engineering departments and making them separate again. When they were combined in 2009, there were certain circumstances and why they were done at that time. So I wanted to have that discussion with this committee and possibly the Public Works Committee, so I'm just wondering if we should just have a joint meeting between the two. I know that was one of the steps that took place in 2009, unless you want to give me your consensus as far as our direction right now, but just.
Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Chwleski.
I had said this before, the reason we did it last time was to save money. I don't think we saved any money by doing it. Right now, with seeing the change where everybody's under the city administrator, all it is like an extra level of management that I don't think we need. I think we can save money this time by eliminating that position.
Both of those positions?
No, just eliminate the Mike's position and have a department head in Public Works and a department head in Engineering.
So going back to the status quo ante,
Right.
how it was before.
Right.
So removing the assistant director of Public Works, is that what you're saying?
No, the director of Public Works,
Mm-hmm.
there'd be a department head in Public Works and in Engineering,
Mm-hmm,
the way it was before.
okay.
You're just eliminating the, whatever his title is, Mike's title, you're just eliminating that position only.
Yes.
And the engineering and public works would get some sort of pay bump, I imagine,
Yep.
as being department heads now.
So I think.
But not as much
And
as the
It wouldn't
director of public
equal, the
works and
net, the net would
engineering
be
was.
less, yeah, the net would be less. I mean, one less employee and a net less payroll now.
Well, Tom, go ahead.
Voice of
I
experience.
think what you're looking for is to go back to having a chief engineer instead of a director of public works and engineering. So you eliminate the big job, you can reduce the pay because now the person is just the chief engineer responsible only for engineering department. And then you have a director of public works as we had years ago. And so it basically is, the assistant director right now, he's called an assistant director because we have someone over both departments, he would be made, or someone else would be put into that position as the director of public works. So now you've got two positions, the responsibility of the current assistant director of public works is really, he's got the same responsibility, he's just being retitled as the director because he's got the same people under him. The director of public works and engineering position is eliminated, so that position, the pay can be reduced because he's no longer responsible for public works at all, just engineering. And you may need two people in engineering because you had another retirement coming up as well, so. And I think by statutory, Wisconsin statutes, I think we need a chief engineer position.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Alderman Weigel.
So the chief engineer would then report to the city administrator.
And the director of public works would also.
report to the city administrator.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's where we're at on the committee, right? We want to separate it.
I think that's what makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just a matter of what
Just
the-
didn't
what they're
sound
called,
right.
chief engineer or director of engineering or whatever.
And I also wouldn't look at hiring an assistant public works person, because that's defeating our purpose.
Yes, yeah, the public works would keep the same number of people, right? Yes, Alderman May.
But would engineering see another person? We seem to be putting a lot on engineering lately with increase in the number of roads, parks. We got the sewer lateral service. Would we be adding someone, but instead of at the top, we'd be adding them, I guess,
Well, if we
lower
add
on
as
the.
needed.
below.
Yeah, this is the top of the,
Hey, go ahead, Tom.
I think in the end it'll wash.
Well, again, you've got two openings, or you're gonna have two openings with the retirements. Well, one of those openings is the director of engineering and public works,
he's gone.
who is, a lot of his time is spent in public works related things, so if you hire just a chief engineer, I'd have to assume he's gonna be a working engineer and be able to pick up some of the overflow in the engineering department, so you're gonna be able, I think, to keep the same number of positions you have now. Just that, you know, the responsibilities are gonna shift a little.
We'll see.
And that would be an
I'm a
internal
little
and an
nervous. I think
external
that-
search.
That's not the
But you're an
topic
engineer.
of today. There's a lot out there. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
But for the discussion, yes, I think that makes sense.
So yes, a joint meeting?
I don't think we need a joint
We have,
meeting.
I guess we have a
You know
recommendation.
what
We have a recommendation.
As long as Public Works agrees,
Yeah.
then we don't need a joint meeting. If they disagree, well, then let's have a joint meeting so we can tell them why they're wrong.
We'll
and
wrestle.
we get them to agree with us.
We'll arm wrestle.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, you have to wrestle your co-alderperson.
All right, yeah, that was item 1. And then item 2 is employee recognition, suggestion award program, and employee engagement activities.
So this is mainly an update to the committee. In the spring and summer of this year, there was a survey given to employees regarding employee recognition. Did they want to continue the annual employee recognition service award dinner, or would they prefer something else? And what did they think about the suggestion award program? This was done by Human Resources and Communication. How'd you say it? So basically, the over 200 employees participated. 75% of people that responded did not want to be recognized in a city event. So their preference was to be recognized in a casual event, or be offered a gift, or have a department celebration. And employees, the resounding theme is employees wish their leaders would provide them immediate feedback, praise. A verbal thank you would go a long way. So Audrey, myself, and John Mandy from Communications got together to talk about how we should have this program going forward, and the thought was that for 2018 we would provide the departments some resources to have their own program and do recognition on a department level instead of at a city level based on the survey results. Obviously, that can be changed at any time, but that's the current thought that we would have for 2018. So, as far as the suggestion award program, a lot of people preferred that they wanted to be recognized for the improvements they did in their own jobs. The suggestion award program is for something that's outside of your responsibility. So we, as you know, we're currently working on a pay for performance program. This would obviously be part of that, is your innovations that you would do in your own job. So that would be something we'll be including as part of that program. Is there any questions on those two? And the third is employee engagement activities. We also conducted another survey called the Q12, the Gallup Q12, to see how engaged employees are. There's a thought and a lot of details regarding the more engaged employees are, the better they do their jobs and things like that. So we're working on gathering that information. We do have the results back. We're working through sharing that information with all of the employees in the departments, and in a few months we'll bring it back to this committee and provide the committee the details of the results and of the survey and our actions going forward. But I just wanted to provide the committee an update on those activities.
Sounds good.
Do we get a copy of that survey?
Of the survey results? Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything on those items before we move on to the next agenda item?
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks on that, Rebecca. And then item 3, discussion regarding policy and procedure 1424, overtime, compensatory time, and premium pay, and emergency operations overtime.
So, Mr. Chair,
Alderman May.
I had asked for this one to come back after some strong urging from some individuals within the police department who feel that they're not adequately being paid. For example, when they go out on SWAT operations, they're not being paid time and a half like some of their cohorts below them are. I don't know. Chief,
But they're getting straight time. Just
They're
for
getting
clarity.
straight time, but it's straight time towards time off, correct? Rebecca?
No.
It can be either.
It can be paid too?
It's just the fact that it's straight time and not time.
Not time and a half. So I wanted to bring it here. I'm surprised the individual who has contacted me is not here. I don't know if, Chief, if you have anything to add on this?
I'll come up here.
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman Michael.
So you're saying that if they go out on a SWAT, this isn't for SWAT training, this would be on an actual, and it runs over an 8-hour day, it runs into a 12-hour day, a 14-hour day, they're still just getting paid straight time.
Yes. That's for the
Exempt.
exempt. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
The non-exempt. So the younger patrol officers that might be doing the same thing are paid time and a half, but a lieutenant in that situation would be paid just straight time. The chief in that situation gets paid nothing. He doesn't get overtime.
Perfectly fine with.
Yeah.
But let's send him to all the
Yeah,
SWAT.
yeah.
Let's- What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be out to swat it up?
Yeah.
So back in February when we were talking about compression and everything, I promised that I'd bring this back for
Yeah.
discussion. And I'm following through my promise to see what the committee thinks of the idea and if the chief has any thoughts.
Yeah, the basic issue is in the police department and I believe in the fire department, and I don't know as much about public works. Our world isn't as easy as you go to work at 8 a.m. and you might have to stay past 4 p.m. so now you stay until 6 p.m. That's not the nature of police work. The issue that the lieutenants have with the overtime is that we'll call them at 1 in the morning and we'll say, hey, we have a barricaded gunman. They will wake up, they'll come back to work, and they get straight time compensation for that. So that is the issue that we're dealing with, because it's not always in conjunction with their shift. You look at heroin overdose deaths in the city right now. The lieutenant of the drug unit is going to come back to work and start working that heroin overdose death immediately, or more often than not. There's going to be times that he won't. So the issue is, when we're expecting them to come back to work, should they get time and a half, because it's not merely an extension of their work day, it's physically coming back to work in the great majority of these.
And I think the question also becomes, is above lieutenant, how far do you go then with that time and a half?
So the policy covers lieutenant and captain,
Mm-hmm.
deputy chief in our department, and deputy chief and assistant chief in the fire department are ineligible
Mhm.
for emergency services overtime. So it's lieutenant and captain in our department.
So would it be worthwhile to have someone crunch the numbers to see what this is, in the last few months, what the cost has been and what the exposure would be? Do you have any ideas?
It's, so our overtime is not necessarily calculated like that. We'd have to get into the system. Overtime is merely overtime. You will have a case number assigned to it, but we'd have to look at each example to know, was that them coming back to work, or was it them staying at work? But that's something that we certainly can look at.
And then and now correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking at everybody on this, as I recall, originally our plan, our proposal after the comp study was to have no overtime for lieutenants and captains, but we got pushed back on it and we said, well, okay, we'll give you overtime in emergency situations, but it's straight time. Is my recollection correct on that?
Clearly we had it recorded.
Okay, I don't know either.
I apologize.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm not, well, yeah, and then, well, but then we're, looking at time and a half as well. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think there was pushback because it was more about the not earning until after 45 hours versus the 40 hours.
Yeah.
So then there was a creation of the emergency services overtime, which helped alleviate that, because the feeling was, if you don't give this till 45, people aren't gonna, I'm not saying the employees would do this, but people won't be less willing to come back to work because they wouldn't be earning anything until the 46th hour they put in that week.
Okay.
And I
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
I believe the lieutenant emailed all of the alder people. I'm not certain of that. But he lays out a numbers case that in any emergency services overtime, he, for example, in a SWAT situation, is in charge of everything and is the lowest paid person on that scene.
Per
Because-
hour, but not in total.
well, it depends, but yeah, on that, for that duration of that event per hour, he's the lowest paid person. Police officer earning time and a half would make more than the lieutenant.
Yeah, just so everyone's aware, he had sent an email a while back to everyone. Myself and the mayor responded, so I think we're the only two who actually got that spreadsheet. But
Okay,
yeah,
yep.
Okay.
so is this something we want to explore?
I think so.
Sure, I'm always happy to explore it. Maybe get some solid numbers and get some ideas here of what exactly we're talking about.
So we're talking about time and a half only in an emergency services situation.
Yes.
And those are almost always, in this case, where the lieutenant or captain would be called back. Well, I guess it could happen in the middle of a shift, right?
Yeah, but then they're working, so if they extended past their shift, yes,
Yes.
that would be time and a half,
Time and a
because
half.
it would be called emergency services.
But not automatically if it was like, there's a 4-hour event in the middle of the day,
Correct.
that's just a straight,
Yep.
that's just straight pay.
Yep.
And I, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I think the definition of emergency was to be determined by the department head, so
Correct.
the chief would have the authority to say no on that one, yes on that one.
So, just so we're clear, the costing you're looking for is how much it would cost to change to overtime, or the difference between what the non-exempt employees are receiving and what the exempt employees are receiving?
I don't think, I think it's what it's gonna cost us.
What's the delta for the time and a half versus
Yes.
the time for those lieutenants and captains?
Yeah, what we're paying right now, and if we extend it, what it would cost.
We may not solve compression, there still may be some compression, but we'll be taking a step towards, it is kinda odd that if the guy in charge is making less than everybody else at the party.
Yeah. Council President Lysick.
I'd like to know what other communities do.
Yeah, that was my next question too. I always wanna know what the neighbors do.
You know, I certainly wanna pay our people competitively, but I don't wanna overpay them, I don't wanna underpay them.
All right. All right. Everyone good on that subject? We'll get some information and address that again later. Okay,
Thanks
thanks.
for coming up.
Yep, thanks.
Was this an emergency coming in?
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. Yeah. All right, and then if there's anything else on our agenda, then we're gonna go into closed session. So please take notice that the Administration and Finance Committee of the City of West Allis will meet at approximately 6 p.m. here at City Hall today to vote and the motion and convening closed session at said time and place to discuss collective bargaining matters with the firefighters union and take such further action as may be necessary and appropriate with respect to such matter. A closed session for the purposes is authorized pursuant to the provisions of Wisconsin Statute Section 19.851 EG. That is the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
I have a second and a roll call vote. Alderman Rote.
Aye.
Alderman May.
Aye.
Chapletsky.
Aye.
Weigel.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, we're in closed session.